I've cleaned up all the adhesive off of both sides of the guitar. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cabinet scraper. I got this one from StewMac. You can get these at woodworking stores as well. There's really nothing special about this one. And so what I'm going to do is actually scrape the binding flush on the top, the back, and then the sides. And what that's going to let me do is see if there's any flaws that I need to correct using the melted binding and acetone. And so this is going to take a while, so I'm going to time lapse this, and then in a little bit we'll see what kind of repairs I need to do. So I don't have a clock down here, but if I had to guess, it took about 20 minutes to scrape the binding flush to the top here. This is one of those things where you definitely want to take your time. You don't want to rush and ding up the binding any more than you have to. Occasionally there's situations kind of like in this corner right here in this sharp point where it's actually really hard to scrape. And so I use a razor blade to do this. Of course, you need to be careful, but the razor blade works really well to actually cut the binding here instead of scraping it. And then when it's nice and flat, then you can go ahead and use the scraper just to finish it off. As I said, the technique itself isn't that difficult. The way to realize if you're doing this correctly is when you have your scraper flush to the body, you'll actually scrape off almost sand, or excuse me, it'll look like almost like you're sanding. You'll be scraping off very, very light fibers from the wood. And so when you see both plastic and wood coming up in really fine shavings, that's how you know that you're level at the binding. And so I'm going to clean up these two areas with a razor blade, then I'm going to go to the back and then do the sides. I was trying to avoid having to melt binding and acetone to use as a fix for the binding I've already installed, but unfortunately I've got a few dents in my binding, and rather than scrape the binding so thin to level out the dents, what I'm going to do is build up those areas again with some melted binding and then scrape it off. And so hopefully that will make everything look like it's supposed to. And it's pretty easy to do this. I don't mix this exactly. Essentially cut this up into little pieces, dump some acetone in it. Here I'm using a leftover cheese, a nacho cheese jar. Obviously it's been cleaned out. And so what I'll do is just clip these in here, dump some acetone, cap this up, and then leave it for hours and hours until it melts. All you really need is putting enough acetone in to completely cover the plastic. It'll start to melt down into a very glue-like paste. And when you actually go to use this, if it's too liquidy, you can just leave the top off and some of the acetone will evaporate away, getting you to the consistency that you want. And so as I said, I'm going to let this sit for hours, come back, and then show how I can fix some of the dents in the binding. It's been about a day since I put the binding in acetone, and you can see kind of in the jar here, it's kind of a pasty, glue-like mess. As it turned out, I actually added a little bit too much acetone. So what I did was I left the cap off the jar for, maybe 6 or 8 hours. That let some of the acetone evaporate off, which made this to be a little bit thicker. And so what you see here is this is probably the biggest gap that I need to fix in the binding. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this here. The soupy mix here is actually a little bit okay because it's going to go down into that crack, fill it up. But the blue tape here is just so that I don't make a mess. I've already scraped around most of the area here, and so I don't want to slop it everywhere. I just want to selectively place some more of this paste in. It will melt in with the other binding, and then hopefully it will only take one application, and then I'll be able to scrape it off, and it'll be like nothing happened at all. And I'm just using a screwdriver that I don't particularly care too much about to put this on. It's as easy as that. I'll go around anywhere that needs some repairing. I'll put more of the melted binding in the cracks. I'm gonna let this dry for, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours, maybe overnight, to make sure it's good and firm. Then I can go back and see if it needs any more applications. Of course, if it does, I'll just do the same process over and over again until the crack is filled. And then I can scrape it flush, and then it should be a seamless repair. And here you can see the results. I ended up filling this twice and then scraping, and you can see it's as if there was no gap at all. I'll eventually end up refining this with some sandpaper as I go for finishing, and it's as if as I mentioned, as if I did it right the first time. It's a little fatter here. There's a lip that I'll end up trimming off as I clean up the rest of this binding. But that's how you fix a gap in the binding.